Hi, I'm Academic Lead Developer at RackForms, and in this video we're going to do a deep dive on using bucket repeaters and SQL+. So before we get started, I should actually give a note of caution. This is a slightly more advanced topic. We're going to get into some SQL, not deep, but a little bit. We also should have a good grasp on database structure, like related tables, joins, etc. I should also mention that there's actually a somewhat subtle point here, which is that bucket repeaters are an advanced feature, and you may not actually need bucket repeaters for what you're doing. And so what I mean by that is, if I take a look at this database structure right here, this addresses table, you can see here that I have a bunch of addresses, a bunch of columns in with address-like information. And we could then picture a scenario where we have a form where we deploy it to the field, and we have people, say, going from house to house collecting information. For every house that they stop on and maybe collect survey information or sign somebody up for a service, we send in their information. And so it's not hard then to picture a form structure where we actually take that information and we use a bucket repeater for it, right? So for every one of these houses that they visit, they just click the plus button on the bucket repeater and we add a new row to the database. This is not at all what bucket repeaters are made for. There's actually a much more simple solution for doing this type of work, which is to build a form that looks like this. So we'd have our two fields, or however many we want. We would write the entry to the database, and then immediately afterwards, we use a www redirect to go back to the first page of the form, right? So every time we hit submit, we write to the database, go back to the first page of the format. And you could even embed this in an iframe within a larger form, right? So if we are filling out some type of information and we know that we want to have some repeated data, build this form, use the embed code, the iframe embed code, and then literally just take this and pop it into a larger form. That is how we do that type of work. Bucket repeaters are completely different. They're actually for relating one table to another. And that's, of course, why they're more advanced, but it's because they're doing a much more advanced thing. If it's just repeating data, use this. If you do need to have related data, let's continue on. So I'm going to go ahead and load up a save job right here called Bucket Repeaters. Just note that we can actually load this job ourselves. Under Load Example Job, I just type in Bucket, and under Buckets, Bucket Repeaters, it's this guy right here. I modified the job a little bit. Your version will be a little bit different. I've taken out one of the Bucket Repeaters just for simplicity's sake. Please also note that the table we use in this job, this bucket table right here, has its own SQL create code, right? So we don't have to actually create this guy by hand. You just copy and paste this into a database editor to get the table. So before we run this job and submit it through, let's just take a look at the job itself. We have a field called name, and then this name then has friend and story, right? And so I can click the plus here and repeat this these two fields over and over again. So before we actually submit the job ourselves, let's actually take a look at the database and see what's being populated into it. So I have the two tables. I have FB Demo and Bucket. Let's look at Bucket first here. You can see that I have some names right here. And I have, this is important here, this entry key field. And then I have FB Demo. You notice I have the two names, and once again, this ID column right here. Now this is the key. This ID column has two values, 9 and 10, and you notice that in Bucket we have two values as well, 9 and 10. We can then issue a join on this table to see that, in fact, the user with the entry key of 9 has these two friends, and the entry key of 10 has these three friends. So let's actually submit this through and see what it looks like. So go ahead and click Publish Form here. Let's create in this case, what's going to be a third friend. So we'll say Ivan, and he's going to have a friend. He's going to have Peter, Craig, and William. And we'll submit this through. So now let's look at our database. So if I look at my FB demo table right here, this ID column right here is an auto increment field, and so when I refresh this, my new friend Ivan now is going to have an auto increment value of 11. Knowing this, I can already say that in my join statement right here, I can change this bucket.entry key to 11, and I get Ivan's friends when I run this, right? So Peter, Craig, and William. And of course, just to prove this, then if I look at Bucket and refresh its data, here is that entry key of 11, Peter, Craig, and William, right? So what we're doing here is essentially saying this person right here has these related elements. This is going to go in one table. This is going to go in a completely different table. That is what buckets are for right there. It's creating related data structures between two elements. So if we actually look at the job then, so that's what's happening in the database. This is what the first page looks like. Let's take a look at the actual SQL that's running to get this result. So if we kind of do a little bit of reverse engineering right here, we know that this FB demo table right here is somehow supplying its auto increment field into this entry key column right here, right? So when we insert into the database here, when we inserted Ivan, we got this 11 back into RackForms. The way we do that is with this first SQL plus item right here by checking this set last insert ID equals retval. The retval value is this guy right here. So if we have, if I look at my structure here, if I have an auto increment field, which in this case ID is, that value is available to us as the set last insert ID equals retval, right? So every time we get a unique key back from the database, and by the way, this works across MS SQL and MySQL, we're going to get it back into a PHP variable called retval. Now this PHP variable now is available to us in the form. And so we use that information in the second SQL plus insert item. So actually, before I do that, let me just see here that all we're doing is we're inserting name into the FB demo table, right? Which is what we'd see right here. It's just the name and then grabbing the ID value. This retval value then is available to us in the second SQL plus insert item. So here now we're inserting into Bucket the entry key, the friend, and story. So if we look at Bucket, here is the friend. I mean, actually, the story is blank right now, but here's the friend, and then here, of course, is the entry key. The entry key value is coming from retval, right? So this is a token that says grab the value of this PHP variable right here, right? And it's a PHP variable, as we can see up here. So $, and then the braces means it's a PHP variable. As we can see here, this is available as retval. So that's how it works. There is one last thing then that occurs here, which is for the bucket processing mode, we have a few options right here. And I'm just going to real quickly cover these. I actually suggest that you experiment with these a little bit just to see what the different results are. But the basic idea is in a SQL plus item that's not inserting bucket information, these guys are just going to be blank, right? They're just going to be default. So no bucket processing, we're not processing a bucket, etc. But in one where we are processing a bucket, we do need to fill these guys out. And so in this case here then, I'm saying for the processing mode, I want to include all items, which is why I select this guy right here. We have the option of not processing the first bucket item. Sometimes it's helpful for some data collection tasks, but for most cases, we always want the one row per duplicate item. And then for the bucket that we process, this is just a dynamic field. It allows us to select any of the buckets in our form. And by the way, we can name buckets at will. So this guy just happens to be called bucket 10, but we call it something different, and it would show up in our dropdown right here. Finally then, I am going to put in this retval value right here, just to make sure that RackForms connects everything properly for us. So if we're using the SQL plus last insert return value, it's going to be called retval. And this is interesting because it allows us to actually use the retval from these entries as well. So that's basically it then. The data structure that we're creating here is relating more than one table. And by the way, we could create far more complex structures than this, but we're relating two tables, in this case FB demo and FB bucket. If you don't need to relate two tables, we should be creating a job again that looks like this right here. We just redirect to the first page, and again, you do all sorts of crazy things. You can embed this into another form, etc. So your users would think that this is like a bucket repeater, but it's not. Of course, if you have any questions about this, again, it's an advanced topic, please feel free to email us, info@rackforms.com. And thanks for watching.